Hi everyone, my name is Dan Gallant, I'm your host. Today we are going to make a sourdough goulette. So this is a multi-day process. We start out with mixing it on day one and kneading it and doing all the things that we need to do. Then there'll be bulk fermentation inside the refrigerator. And then tomorrow we're gonna go and bake it. And we're gonna have ourselves a nice loaf of sourdough goulette. So let's get started. The equipment that we'll need to make this is a mixer, although frankly you could use your hands, but having a mixer is very nice and very useful. The other thing that we'll be using is this scale. This will allow us to weigh in grams or in ounces, but we're going to be using grams today. It's much easier to weigh ingredients than it is to measure them because it's far more precise. The ingredients for this are going to be, quite obviously, we're going to need flour. We're using bread flour today. We're going to need starter, approximately 227 grams of starter, more on that in a minute. We're going to be needing water, approximately 2 cups of water, but we'll do that by weight as well. And finally, about 18 grams of salt. We're going to start by tearing the scale, and by tear I mean that we're going to set it up with the weight. So we're going to start with a heavy weight. This is the ball from the mixer. I'm going to place it on the scale, and then I'm going to tear the scale by pressing it on with the mixer, and you'll see that it'll bring it up to 0. From there, we'll place 227 grams of starter, and as you see, I'm pouring my starter in here, and we're trying to get it as close to 227 grams as possible. I'm doing this slowly because the scale takes a little bit of time to get it. If I go over or under a little bit, that's okay too. We're going to get approximately 220, and as close as we can get to that number. Of course, it is possible to simply measure these using measuring cups, but as I said before, this is much more accurate, much more precise. So that should be pretty close. I'm betting that's close to 100. And here we go, a little bit more. And you can see it's coming out real nice. 220, that's it. Looks like, no, 216, we can go a little bit more. And bloop, 225, I'd say that's pretty good. So let's keep that at 225 grams. And that's the rest of that is looking pretty good. I'll talk about how to get that to that nice, lovely, bubbly mess. This is in effect, the starter is the yeast. And what we've done is we've trapped yeast that live in the air with the starter. That's what a starter is. So you should have created the starter. This could take weeks. You could also buy starter fresh, or really the best way to do it is to have a neighbor or a friend simply give it to you, because so much of it is thrown away anyway. So again, we'll discuss how to make a starter in a minute. Now let's turn our attention to the flour. Actually, before we do that, let's turn our attention to the water. We are looking for approximately 1 3/4 cups or 397 grams of water. So what we're going to do is once again, we're going to tear the scale. The scale is now off. So we're going to turn it back on with the weight of the flour. And you see, the starter, which is essentially flour and water and yeast. And we're back to 0. And now what we want is, again, 397 grams. Now I like to warm my water up a little bit beforehand. I didn't do that here, but a few seconds in the microwave isn't bad. And we're looking for almost 400. 200, 300, almost there. 389. Oh, a little lower, but that's okay, 406. Now what I like to do is take it off the scale, which you'll see here, and give it a good little stir. And what we're trying to do here is we are really trying to incorporate the water with the starter a little bit more. And allow, because the starter, again, it's flour and water and yeast. But what we really are doing is we're trying to get that yeast to grow. And the way we're going to get it to grow is by mixing it up. We're going to feed it with flour. And that's, in fact, the next part. So now that we've done a little bit of that, we're about to go ahead and take this, the bowl, put it back on the, first let's turn that off. Take the bowl, put it back on there, and we're going to measure out 602 grams of flour. Okay, now that we've added the flour, that's 601 grams actually, but pretty close. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to turn our attention to the salt. So what I want to do is we're going to come over here, I'm going to grab the salt, and I like to use a coffee filter, but it's not required. And what I'll do is I'll tare it, which of course, T-A-R-E, by the way, not T-E-A-R. And what I'm looking for is approximately 18 grams of salt. That's 14, 18, there we go. And that is in fact the final ingredient. Handed to bring it in from here. And now all the ingredients are incorporated. That leaves only one thing to do, which is to come over to the mixer. Lock it in place. And there we go. Lock the mixer down. Again, if you don't have a mixer, that's okay. You can do this by hand. It's pretty quick. And what we're looking to do is we're trying to get it to the point. There it goes. We're incorporating all of the ingredients. That looks good. And believe it or not, that is pretty much it. So now all we need to do, I'll unlock it. We're going to let that blob come back down in the bowl. And we're going to scrape it down. And that's kind of it. Here we go. Get all the little bits out. Don't want to waste anything. Now, an interesting thing is, if for some reason you live in a climate where you are worried that your yeast won't give you the rise that you're looking for, because it's different when you're baking with sourdough than when you're baking with regular powdered yeast. It seems to go much slower. And people are concerned you don't get the rise. Believe it or not, the professional bakers will add, horror of horrors, they'll add regular yeast to give it an additional rise. We're not going to do that today, but I have done that in the past. I'm not afraid to do it again. All right, we can take this piece out, and we're going to take the bowl out. Get all those last little bits out. Okay. I didn't do a great job here. I need to do a better job. Scraping it down. All right. Okay. We'll get rid of that. Sink. And bowl comes off. There we go. And we're done with the mixer. What we need to do at this point is take a bit of plastic cling wrap. And we're going to cover this. And I want to show you, this is what it looks like. It's going to look different in an hour. We're going to let it sit on the counter for about 1 hour. The next part of this is that we're going to take it and we're going to knead it. So we'll be back in an hour. Now, while we're waiting for the bread, I will take this opportunity to get my yeast back. So right now, this is all I've got of my starter. Well, since I want to make bread tomorrow too, I'm going to make some more starter. So how do I do that? I'm going to take, I don't know, I would say about half water and half flour, a little more than half. So I'm going to add my flour. I do this by eyeball mostly, but I'm going to add some flour here. And I have to make sure that I have enough to make bread for tomorrow. And I know how much I need because I just made it today. It's 227 grams. So then I'm going to add some water. Oh, one thing about the water, which I didn't mention. Make sure that the water that you use, both for the bread and for the starter, is not tap water. Now, why? Because tap water includes things to keep it very clean in the pipes, like chlorine. Chlorine kills yeast. And since we're trying to grow yeast, that's the last thing you want to do. So the water that you choose to use for your starter should be either bottled water or filtered water. I'm using filtered water. But as long as it is not the stuff off the tap, you're doing a very good thing. I actually killed my last starter doing that accidentally, and it's a mistake I don't want to repeat, and I don't want you to repeat it. So what I'm going to do here is I'm mixing it up, and I'm going to show you what it looks like. The consistency is like about peanut butter, is what I would say. So you want nice and thick, and you're looking to get bubbles. Now, when you saw it before, it had all those kind of cool bubbles in it. Right now, it doesn't because the yeast hasn't grown yet. So I'm going to, done with that, close up the bread flour. I need more bread flour, obviously. And we're going to put that aside overnight, and then tomorrow, it should be all bubbly and nice. But in the meantime, we're waiting for the bread, and then I'm going to come back and show you what to do with the bread. And then we're also going to have our starter all set too. So we're kind of done for the next hour. Okay, we're back. It's been an hour. Let's take a look at what has happened in the last hour. As you can see, I'm taking the plastic off and I'm carefully leaving it aside so I can reuse it. You can see what's happened here. It's sort of put itself together a little bit. So what we're going to do is, on this nice clean surface, I'm going to take a little bread flour and spread around. Now, I'm going to use a tool called a flour wand, but most people do not have one of these tools, and that's fine. Just take your fingers and do it, but I kind of like to grab this and give it a little shaky shake. Get some flour on my surface. Just leave that in there, close that up. My hands have been washed. This countertop has been washed, but when I washed it, I tried very hard. I did not use chemicals, so I washed it originally with, I have used chemicals to wash it in the past, but this time what I did was I washed it with a little bit of lemon juice and water. And the idea was that I want to be very careful because I'm now making bread that I intend to ingest. So I do not want a counter that is cleaned with any chemicals. So as soon as I washed it with a little bit of lemon juice and water, you could use vinegar, that's okay, white vinegar. When you're done, what you want to do is you want to take that stuff and then wash it off the counter with pure water. So that's a terribly important thing to do. So I used pure water, and I did it in 2 steps to make sure, absolutely sure, that I'm having no chemicals or flavors or anything of that nature in my bread. All right, so what I'm going to do now, this is kind of wet and kind of sticky, as you can see, and that's exactly how we want it. So I'm going to now just get some of that lovely flour on my hands. And now I don't need the bread, need the dough, because frankly, there's no need to do it. So we're going to use a folding technique. Now there's two ways to do this folding technique. One of them is simply just what I'm doing now, which is to stretch it all out. And you don't want to stretch it too hard. You want to sort of keep it together. And then you want to pull it apart a little bit. And the purpose of the flour is to keep it, the ability for it to move around without sticking to the counter. And then I'm just going to sort of fold it in and move around, fold it in. There we go. And I like to roll it around a little bit in this flour, this extra flour, to get the stickiness off of the outsides of it. That'll do. And then we're going to put it right back into the bowl. Oh, here's another thing you can do if you like. Get a little squish around the bottom. No need at this point, but we're going to put it right back into the bowl. We're going to take the plastic wrap that I have carefully saved, because we want to save the environment, and reuse the plastic wrap. Okay, that is fold number one. We fold once an hour. Fold once an hour for 3 times. So this is fold number one. We're going to come back in an hour and do it again, and then we're going to come back in an hour and do it exactly the same way again. So we'll see you then. So here we are. It's the last hour. Time for our final fold. But before we do that, I want to introduce 2 more pieces of equipment. The first one is we're going to need a bowl. So bowl. And the second one is we're going to need a piece of parchment paper. Now the parchment paper is for the final baking. We're not baking yet. That won't be until tomorrow. But right now we need to bake. So we need to think about baking, excuse me. So what we're going to do is once we do the final fold, we're going to put it in the bowl to so it can go back in the refrigerator until tomorrow, do its bulk fermentation, which hopefully will gain some size. In the meantime, we have this fitted parchment paper. Now, I want to talk just very quickly about this. You don't need parchment paper when you're baking, but it's certainly valuable because it keeps it from sticking to the vessel that we're going to be baking in. But in addition to that, a lot of people have a problem because if I put it on the ground, it's going to roll right back up. So how do I prevent that from happening? A lot of people have a lot of ways, but the easiest way is simply to crumple it up into a ball. And then when you uncrumple it, it'll stay in any shape that you put it in. So I don't know why people make this so difficult when all they really have to do is this. So what we're going to do is we're going to take the parchment paper, we're going to press it into the bowl, because when I do the final fold, this is where it's going. So just as before, we are going to flour our surface. This is the final time, so a little bit less flour this time because I won't need as much. So we'll flour the surface, and when I take it, take that, put the flour away because now we're done with it. When we take the dough out, and you'll see here it's actually gained in size, it should have, and it's also relaxed a bit. So I'm going to, oh, it has stuck to the bowl. So we're going to attempt to remove it without tearing it, keeping it in its ball shape as much as possible. And out onto the floured surface. And look at that, that looks great. We're done with the bowl, we can clean that. And now we're going to do that last fold, and right now it's going to feel much better, much more elastic. So as you can see, I'm just going to do that last fold. And the folds really, a lot of people ask, what's the purpose of the folds? There's a lot of reasons for them, but one of them is to aerate. Because what we're trying to do is we want this dough to be as fluffy as possible because we're trying to make a fluffy bread. So in order to make the fluffy bread, we got to make sure that the air can get into it. Okay, so that's it. We're going to just do that. This, believe it or not, is going to be a lovely little brulee. So we're going to take that now, get some flour up there, keep it from sticking as much as possible, and then into the bowl, and then touching the sides. And then I'm going to take that piece of plastic that we used from the beginning, reuse it again, trying to use as little as possible because it is not good for the environment. And we are going to cover this as tightly as I can. And there we go. This is going to go into the refrigerator. And then tomorrow, or actually, this interesting point, it doesn't have to be tomorrow. It can be several days from now. That's fine. It just can't be a real long period of time. I wouldn't go for more than 4 or 5 days. So you could get ready and do it when you're ready to bake the bread. So we could make a few of these, and then one day we could just bake them in all together. So I'm done for now, and we'll see you tomorrow or the next day. Welcome back. Today is baking day. So there's a lot of preparation that we've done in order to bake this into a bread today. First thing we did was we took it out of the refrigerator this morning and I put it on the counter for about 2 hours and it's gotten its secondary rise. And I've also started the oven. We have started at 500 degrees Fahrenheit and it should be for at least 30 minutes and then we're going to be ready to bake. So in order to get this ready to bake, we have to do a few things. One, we're going to score it. So we're going to use one of a few tools. Let me come over here. So the tools we're using are, we're going to use something called a lame. And here's 2 examples of a lame. That's L-A-M-E, lame. This one, it's essentially a razor blade on a stick. And that will help score it. Or something like this, which I prefer to use. Again, it's a razor blade on a stick. But if you don't have one of these, any good sharp knife will do. This is the dough we're going to be turning into a bread. Notice how much it's risen from when I took it out of the refrigerator this morning. The only other piece of equipment that we need is a cast iron pot. Now this one is a fancy little one, but it doesn't have to be fancy at all. Any cast iron pot will do, but it has to be cast iron. So this one is just smaller than a, I don't know, but it's a good size. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to take the bread dough and we're going to place it inside. And you notice that's why I had it in the parchment paper before, so that I could just very easily lift it out of the bowl and place it into the baking pot. But if you don't want to use a pot, they actually make tools that are used specifically for this purpose. Now, some people, I'm one of them, like to have a little bit of dusting of a little bit more bread flour. Now, you don't have to do this step. Some people don't bother with it. I personally like it because I think it gives it sort of a little bit of a country feel. So again, we're going to use the flour wand, a little bit of flour. I'm going to heat a little bit of a dusting on top. That's it. And I'm going to use the lame, and I'm going to use sort of a hash pattern. So two down, 2 down, 2 across. Open it up. You can do really whatever you like. So that's 2. 2 more. And 1 more. And as I said, you certainly could use a very sharp knife, would do this. And that's it. So now we're going to cover it, keep these in a little bit, lid it up, come over to the oven. Now you notice it's set to 500. What I'm going to do, place it in the oven, immediately turn it down to 450. Because we're going to bake it that way for 45 minutes. Okay, the timer's just ended. This is my favorite part. The part where we get to see what we've done. So I'm going to open the oven and come on in here so we can see. And look at that. That is quite beautiful. All right, what we're going to do is quickly close this. We need another 10 minutes. So we'll check in 10 minutes. Okay, it's been about 10 minutes since I first took the lid off. Now, I'm going to turn it off here. That's what we're looking at. I'm going to leave the oven open, enjoy the heat. So here we are. And look at that. I'm going to now remove it and immediately take it out. And I have little handles here because that's the parchment paper. And take it out and lay it onto the cooling rack. So, what I'm going to do, throw this all away. You can clearly see the fruits of all our efforts. This is one beautiful, beautiful boulé. And what you see here is you can see where the slashes were, so the steam could escape, and everybody loves those little crunchy bits. Also, you can see clearly the flour that I put on top of it to give it that sort of that country look. And also, I am also going to show you, and we know it's a good bake because we can look at the bottom. Well, little toasty, nice crumb. And the only last thing I would tell you is don't immediately cut into it. Gotta let it cool for a couple hours. It has to be at room temperature before you cut into it. If I were to cut into it now, even though it smells wonderful, it would look and taste like glue. So we want to avoid that. We're going to let it cool and we're going to enjoy the bread. So, thanks for joining. My name's Dan Gallant. Hope you enjoyed. Today's recipe was from the King Arthur Baking Company. If you want to use this recipe, here is the URL.